Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2024 Kawasaki Versys-X 300. Now, I've been a fan of this bike for a while, but 2024 brings about a different climate that this is in, a different competition, a different environment, even within the own Kawasaki family. So in this review, we're going to compare this bike and talk about it, talk about the features, about who it's good for and who maybe it's not as good for. And I'll tell you one honest thing, the market is shrinking for this bike because of Kawasaki's own work. So I'm filming here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. This is the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer in the country. And if you're a fan of anything that has to do with Kawasaki, make sure you subscribe to this channel because I'll be covering every bike that they have here at the dealer. And I'll make sure I can come back to bikes again and again. So if I don't answer all the questions you have on this bike right now, I'll be able to come back to it again and again. All right, let's get going with this review. So before we get into the specifics of this bike, let's just quickly place it in the Versys lineup and then in the Kawasaki lineup. So in the Versys lineup doesn't really make sense. At the top of the line, you have the 1000. That is a two-person touring bike, not super sporty, but it has some sport capability. You move down to the 650 and you still have a touring capable bike, a light touring bike, and it has the luggage included, it has the luggage that can fit a full face helmet, and it is in that sweet spot in the engine that is kind of that perfect on-road bike. I like to call it the perfect single person touring bike, but it also has a little bit more sporty flair than the 1000. So you move down to the 300 and what do you get? Well, you get the former Ninja 300 engine. So is this sporty? Well, not exactly. The 300X is, or the Versys-X 300, excuse me, is a bike that is a little bit more off-road, but it's not fully off-road. So it's got a little bit more gravel-friendly tires, but it's still got an oil pipe here, or an oil filter that hangs down low there. So it's not something that has a lot of skid plate. It's not an adventure bike, something like the KLR. It's in its own little unique space, and I think it's a great little touring bike, and viewed on its own, it's got a lot going for it. But as I said, the Kawasaki lineup has changed, and two things that have changed is the Versys 300 was always kind of in that weird spot because it never moved up to the 400 engine of the Ninja. Again, this was the Ninja 300 engine, the Ninja moved to the Ninja 400, and now the Ninja has moved to the Ninja 500, more correctly the Ninja 451, and this is still sitting with the 300. So that's gonna play into who this bike is for and who it's not for. Let's get going with the features and specs, and as we move towards the end, I'm going to start making clear the type of person that should buy this bike and the type of person that should avoid this bike and look elsewhere in the Kawasaki lineup. So starting at the front wheel here, again, if you've seen my reviews, you know I like to start at the front wheel because it gives you an idea of the manufacturer's intent. And you can see the manufacturer's intent here, sort of. There's a little bit of misleadingness to this in some ways, but you have the 190/19 tire, so it's a 19-inch diameter tire, and it is more off-road friendly. Again, mostly on-road, but some off-road capability, some little extra tread in there. And that does a few things for you. Now, when I say it's a little misleading, you have the look here of something that is fully off-road. The 19-inch diameter wheel is going to help for a little bit better rolling on larger obstacles. You've got the spoked rims, which is what you want to see on something that's going off-road. Big disc brake with the ABS brakes. Where it's misleading is, like I mentioned earlier, that beyond this front wheel, you have pretty much a street bike. You have that oil filter hanging down low. So you'd want to get some protection if you're going to go a little further off the road than the manufacturer's intent. But again, I'm sure the aftermarket or even Kawasaki can probably hook you up with something there. But it is worth noting that this will go comfortably onto dirt roads, comfortably onto like gravel roads, more so than something like a Z500 or something, which would be in a similar class to this. A couple things you'll see here, you still have the pedal style disc. Kawasaki used to do this. It's more of a style thing, but they used to say it was helped with dissipating heat. I don't know that it makes a huge difference because their super bikes are all round now, but it gives you a cool little style. And this little ring here, that ABS ring, also labeled up here on the fender, is something that's nice to have. A lot of people consider this bike as a first bike. I think it's a great first bike, and having ABS on your first bike, I think, is just a really good thing to have. Again, ABS not mandated in Canada on bikes like it is in other parts of the world, but nice to have that. Other than that, basic suspension works well. We're going to move through this bike now. So taking a look at the heart of this bike, again, this is the Ninja 300 engine. Now it does have fins here, that's just a styling thing. These fins are not really needed for cooling because it does have a radiator, so it's a fully modern engine as far as what comes with it. It's a very high revving engine, which makes it a little different than the average off-road bike. Something like the KLR and this, people always want to know the difference. The difference is this one is a twin cylinder, the KLR is a single cylinder. Obviously the KLR has more displacement, but the KLR is going to have more of a thump thump, kind of low revving, torque down low kind of feel. This is going to be a high revving, so it's not a problem to run this thing higher in the revs. A lot of people think that's an issue. It's just not. And so what it is a higher revving engine that we'll show you as we get to the dash exactly how high it goes. But it is something that has proven to be very reliable. Now, why did it not move to the 400? Why did it not move to the 451? We're going to get to that a little bit later in the video. Take a look at the rear wheel here. You can see a little bit more of that on-off-road tread. One of the benefits to tread like this is it's also very good in the rain. So you have a little bit extra water clearance, that kind of thing. So something that's good to know for all season or all weather type capability. It is only a 130 wide tire, which is a fairly narrow rear tire. Again, that partly helps with the flickability of this. It's able to go from side to side nice and quickly. So it's a very fun to ride bike. You can see you still got disc brakes in the back there, ABS ring there. And you've got your exhaust here, your muffler. Your muffler does a good job of muffling. This is a very quiet bike to sneak in and around the neighborhood, sneaking around. So that kind of makes it a fun bike if you just kind of want to wander everywhere and not be too conspicuous. That's part of what makes this bike good. So taking a look at the front of this bike, this is where this bike really starts to make sense for a lot of people. It's hard to find a decent wind-protected bike that's a small CC that you can take on big tours. And this one here, although the windshield isn't adjustable like on the 650 and the 1000, it's just a fixed-in windshield. Just the fact that you have a mount here, you can get aftermarket to go larger. Even on its own, it is a very upright and protective windshield. And then you have a fairly protective bodywork here, which again, going to keep that wind off. That extends the season if you're in cooler weather. It makes for longer rides to be more pleasant because it keeps some of that wind off you. So that's all good. Some of the less good, or at least other reasons you may want to consider other bikes in the Kawasaki lineup, is the headlight here is an incandescent bulb, a halogen bulb. So you don't have, and same with the signal lights, and in fact, every safety light on this bike is incandescent, not LED. Something like the Z500, every light on that bike is a full LED. So you do have some dated stuff here. Now you can add extra lights here. We'll show you that when we get to the dash. So you do have the options to put LED lights on this bike, but it is something worth noting that you're starting to see the age of this bike creep through, especially compared to what's around you, even within the showroom in Kawasaki in 2024. Taking a look at the back end, at no point showing you the lights because, again, we talked about them. They're just incandescent bulbs and incandescent taillight here. What you do have here is something that is also fairly unique in a bike that is of this price class and also in this sort of displacement class. You have a rack already built in from the factory. So you can see you've got your presets here for different kinds of mounts, but you've also got down here hooks on the side here. You've got the rails down here, which are for the passenger grab rails, but they also make it relatively level with the seats. So even if you didn't want to buy extra luggage, you could strap on a duffel bag here very easily. Lots of places to mount soft luggage, but there is the option from Kawasaki to mount some hard luggage on here as well. Not the same as the Versys 650, a little bit more square, so it won't fit a full face helmet, but it will fit a number of your adventure gear to go with. So you have lots of options for lockable and non-lockable ways to take luggage, and that makes it really practical as well. Since we show the seat, we should show you what it's like to sit on this bike. It's a unique seating position for an entry-level bike as well. Let's take a look at that. So the seating position on this bike is actually very good and very comfortable. It is still a taller bike. All of the Versys 600 or all of the Versys lineup is from the 650 to the 1000. This one's not super tall because it is a fairly narrow seat at the front. But again, I'm 6 feet tall. I can flat foot on here. But if you're a whole lot less, you probably will be tippy-toeing a little bit. This is a bike that's capable of fitting two people comfortably simply because you're fairly upright when you're sitting on it. So again, the engine says you're probably not going to take a two-person tour, but you can take second person around town very comfortably on this bike. And you can see the seating position is very square, very upright, very comfortable. So this is an all-day seating position. Some people say the seat is a little hard. I'll give you that the new Z500 and Ninja 500, they've redesigned that seat. It's probably a little bit more comfortable seat than this, but seating position, you can't really beat this at all. Again, I don't think you're going to be super uncomfortable on this seat, but it's worth noting again that Z500 sitting in the lineup. So we'll talk about that a little bit further. Let's take a look at the dash and controls on this bike now. So taking a look at the dash on this bike, in some ways this is a little bit of a disappointment only because Kawasaki is doing such great things with their dashes and their entry-level bikes. On this bike, you do show some things that are a little bit more dated compared to the other bikes in the lineup. The other thing that's a little bit dated is the key. I don't know if you've seen a modern Kawasaki key, but it's a little bit nicer, more modern than that. And included on something like the Ninja 500, you're actually keyless now, even on that entry-level type model. So that's an option anyways, on the depending on which level of Ninja 500 you get. So let's zoom into the dash dash here for a second. Let's go all the way in and we'll see what you've got. Now, first of all, we talked about this being a high revving engine, 12,000 RPM redline. Now remember, smaller engines can rev higher without any issues. So you are going to be revving this bike up a little bit more, but it's not been an issue for reliability. Very small engine, very small pistons moving very short distance. So it's different than big pistons moving a long distance. So that's one thing that's worth noting. Now you do have a lot of good information in here. You have a fuel gauge just on the side in here. It's a little hard to see on the angle we're showing there, but we'll try to get a little closer. Fuel gauge and temperature gauge over here. You have a speedometer and then odometer up top, and then you have some information down low. So we can cycle through that information down low. Kilometers per liter is what it's showing right now, so that was instant and average. You can change that to liters per 100 kilometers, miles per gallon US, miles per gallon UK. So you can go on through, you show your range here. As you're driving, it'll show you how much you have left based on how you've been driving, as far as in this one's in kilometers, it can be miles as well. And then back to there. Then on the top you have odometer, trip A, trip B, and back to your odometer. So no gear indicator on this section, but you do have it in your dash there with the clock. Those are always there. So you've got a full set of gauges for an entry-level bike. Very good, but not the TFT display that you can get in the Z500 that also can pair with your cell phone with the Rivalry app. So something worth noting. Now we'll zoom out just a little bit here just to look at a couple options that you can't see. This bike does have a cutout here for a USB port. You could put something like a GPS on this bike and wire it right in. And on the other side, we talked about adding LED lights if that's something that you wanted to do. This is a switch you could just put, or this is a cutout where you could put a switch. You can put that Kawasaki LED lighting kit on this, and then you would have some LED lighting options as well. So it's all ready for you to go as far as a touring bike, but some of the pieces you have to add through the Kawasaki accessories or aftermarket if you want. Before we talk about who this bike is for, we should point out a couple unique features on this bike, and that is basic controls here. So you've got your high beam, your low beam, signals, and horn. You do have the flash to pass here, which is typical of Kawasaki, but you also have that adventure-friendly hazard lights, four-way flashers, whatever you want to call them. Nice to have on an entry-level bike. The other thing that's incredible with this bike is the clutch feel. It is a slipper and assist clutch, and it is super, super light. So you can just easily grab that light clutch. And again, as a bike that doesn't have a ton of power, you're going to be shifting gears through town a little bit more. Very pleasant bike to drive through town. All right, now let's wrap up by talking about who this is for and who it's not for, and other bikes you may want to consider in the Kawasaki lineup that have kind of moved ahead of this bike in my mind as well. So if you've followed this channel for a while, you know I've reviewed this bike in the past, and you know I'm a fan of this bike, and I'm still a fan of this bike, but I do think that within Kawasaki's own lineup, there are now some other great options that are going to cross over with this. So first of all, this was a very upright, square kind of feeling, comfortable bike to go long distances on in that entry-level segment, but you now have the Eliminator 500, which is that 451 engine from the Ninja, and that also has a square seating position, so your legs are kind of square as opposed to something like the Vulcan where your legs are out in front of you. That also can fit bags, it also can tour, and of course it has a bigger engine. You could put a little windshield on that or something like that, I'm sure, but that is an option for a very comfortable bike with a more powerful engine, and if you're not going to go down the dirt and gravel roads, that is another bike worth strongly considering. The other problem with this bike right now is that we all have talked about it not having that Ninja 400 engine, not having that Ninja 500 engine. We now have a Z500 priced below this. The Z500 that is priced below this does still come with a LCD dash, so it has a sort of more advanced dash that can be paired with a smartphone. So you've got options within Kawasaki's lineup that definitely step it up with tech. They give you LED lighting all around. There's a lot of options in the price point. And the interesting point is this does have value for its price when you consider the racks, when you consider the wind protection and those kinds of things. But there are other comfortable bikes that are priced around this and even below this with a little bit more tech now that are more modern. So again, both the Eliminator and that Z500 both have that smart dash that pairs with that Rivalry app. So those are things that you have to consider, but that kind of makes a stop to your Kawasaki dealer worthwhile. You can see this bike, you can see the competition, you can sit on them, and you can see which one's best for you. So would I still recommend this bike? Absolutely. I would still recommend this bike to people who are wanting something that is small cc, entry level, fairly tall riding position with a little bit of wind protection, and you can add that luggage on. And even if you don't pay for the extra luggage, it easily straps on just a duffel bag and that kind of thing. You can go adventuring on this bike. But I do think it's a narrower market now with the other great options in Kawasaki's lineup, and that kind of changes my view on it. So even though the engine's not as big as others, it's also now the technology has fallen behind, which means Kawasaki really needs to put the 451 engine in this and update the technology. So there's my review of the Kawasaki Versys-X 300. And if you're interested in this bike and you want to know more, make sure you let me know in the comments below. I'll make sure I answer you in the comments. And if we need to, we'll make another video covering the things that you want to know about this bike. Thanks everybody for watching. Talk to you again in the next one.